Hello, everyone. My name is John Williams. I'm the Chief Executive of the Institute of Leadership and Management, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to International Leadership Week 2023, a week of celebrating great leadership practice with a plethora of events being held both virtually and face-to-face throughout our community. As well as being at events, you can join the ILW conversation via social media using the hashtag ILW23, or if you'd like to include your events, just look on our website, institutelm.com, for instructions on how to register. Today, it is my privilege to open ILW23, and to do so, I'm delighted to be joined by our special guest, psychology expert, Dr. Maria Katsarumäkin. Maria has over 20 years of practical experience with a doctorate and a proven background in leadership psychology. Maria is the founder of the Leadership Psychology Institute and also the author of Group Dynamics, investigating team dynamics from leaders to corporate gatekeepers. So who better to join me in opening up International Leadership Week 2023? Maria, welcome.
Hi, John. Thank you. It is my privilege, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this amazing event. And thank you to ILM for providing this platform for everybody. Thank you so much. Looking forward to this conversation.
And me too, very much, actually. And it's interesting because there are lots and lots of issues that have emerged in the events that we are looking forward to during the course of this week. And yet, as so often, there are some themes emerging there. And there are probably 4 themes in particular. And I thought we would touch on a couple of those to start the week. One of them is well-being. And I know that this is an area in which you are very familiar. And we've almost all taken on board the fact that well-being is the basis for effective organizational leadership. Yeah, I'm wondering which should come first. Is it the well-being of the leadership figure, or is it the well-being of the team?
Yeah, thank you. It is a topic that is very close to my heart. And well-being, when I hear the term well-being, first of all, it does include mental health as well. So it's not just about physical health. So there has been a lot going on, as we know, in terms of that area. We've come out of the pandemic. We see a lot of stress, a lot of burnout. And I do like your question because there's almost an implication that the leaders should be looking after their people. Mm-hmm. And I do have a question mark about that because in my opinion, I think workplaces have the responsibility to, if you like, to support employees in terms of accommodating work schedules, allowing them to work from home, taking time off, for family obligations or anything like that, and there should be a strategy in place. So, and also to have a climate, a psychological safe climate where they can have those conversations. However, it's not, as a leader, it's not your responsibility to look after your employees because it sounds a bit parental, if you like. It is your responsibility to look after yourself. So self-care is a sign of emotional maturity. It's a sign of resilience. And as a person, regardless of whether I'm a leader or not, I do have the responsibility to look after myself. So I don't know if that makes sense or if it sounds a bit paradoxical, but I can't expect somebody to look after me. Yes, I can't expect the workplace to provide, all the infrastructure, if you like, for me to be looked after. And maybe it might be worth mentioning and I'm sure you have seen it, the recent Gallup results. The title was Employee Disengagement Hits 9-year High. And one of the reasons they stated is that employees, they don't feel cared about. So employees do want that their leaders show compassion, that show care, and as I said, have all that infrastructure in place. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and it's a real it's a dichotomy, really, isn't it? Because the idea that employees are becoming more and more disengaged because they don't feel cared about enough, and yet in some ways we shouldn't be, I guess, we shouldn't expect leadership figures to be mollycoddling or wrapping employees in cotton wool. We do expect leadership figures, as you quite rightly said, to create the infrastructure, the safe space in which people can do their best. And I'm reminded of this. Anybody who's traveled on a plane will probably remember the safety instructions, but fit your own mask before you try to help somebody else do theirs. So the self-care, in a sense, should come first as a primary responsibility for leadership. Is that fair, do you think?
Absolutely, yes. And I just repeat what you said. Leaders should encourage the conversations, but it's not their responsibility to look after you or I or whoever. So yes, absolutely.
Do you think that fits with the mindset that we are currently seeing developing in workspaces? I'm thinking particularly this Gallup poll sort of indicates an expectation from employees that they will be cared for and looked after, rather more than we might practically expect.
Exactly. And that's where I see the danger. And that's why those conversations are even more mandatory, to clarify, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to be looked after?
Oh, getting some challenges there with the signal from Maria.
Yes, the signal, yes.
Okay. Can you see and hear me okay now?
Yeah, sorry, John, we can see and hear you now.
Okay,
Fine,
great.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky. Okay. Well, Maria, thank you very much indeed for that. And it's clearly a major challenge for leadership everywhere, I think, really. I suppose, on the one hand, creating the expectations that will be fulfilled as far as well-being is concerned, both for themselves and for their teams. And then actually, not just creating the expectations, but fulfilling them by actually being able to deliver on support for well-being. And part of that is around this issue of coaching and mentoring, which is a significant element, I guess, in encouraging people to feel cared for. We very often see coaching and mentoring, the terms used interchangeably. First of all, do you think that's a problem? And secondly, how do we ensure we get the benefits of both?
I do confirm. I counter that all the time. Coaching, mentoring, and sometimes even training, they seem to be a bit blurred. It is important to distinguish between amongst all those terms, because they are actually different things, because the role and responsibility of the coach or the mentor is actually very, very different, whether you're doing coaching or mentoring. It might be, maybe a useless fact, I don't know. Mentoring actually comes from the Greek word mentor. Mentor was a name like John. And it was as you probably know, it was when Ulysses left for the Trojan War, he placed mentor, an older wise man, in charge of his son Telemachus. So mentor became to mean an older senior advisor. So mentoring is about basically passing on experience, if you like.
Yep.
That doesn't mean it. In mentoring, you can also use coaching skills. So you can have coaching as part of mentoring. However, it's clearly about the transfer of experience or sometimes even organizational savvy to the mentee. And I do know that the Institute of Leadership and Management, you guys have this amazing platform where you are asking your members to become mentors, which is a great opportunity. And in my opinion, in such a relationship, it's not just the mentee that benefits, it's also the mentor, because you learn things from that relationship.
Yep.
And of course, then we have reverse mentoring,
Mhm.
which is basically, and this is really, really relevant these days, because in organizations for the first time ever, we see a wide variety of all generations at work. So sometimes we see challenges because of all the different generations at the workplace. So reverse mentoring, one of the things it can do is to actually bridge that gap between generations. While coaching, again, is a completely different thing. Coaching is usually much more short term, and it focuses on behavioral change on a very, very specific issue with an
Right.
action. And
Right.
the coach should be an expert in how to coach, but they are not an expert in the area that is presented to them by their coachee or the client. So that's one of the main differences. So you could, if you are a good coach, in theory, you can coach a neurosurgeon. You don't have to know how to, perform a brain surgery in order to coach them.
Right.
Yes.
That's really, really interesting, actually, because if I go back to mentoring for just a second, one of the interesting things for me about reverse mentoring is that to a degree, a mentor, and you mentioned before that the coaching skills are useful in a mentor. To a degree, anybody who is mentoring somebody else needs to know how to mentor, a bit like knowing how to coach. And
Absolutely.
one of the interesting things about reverse mentoring, and I'm a big fan of reverse mentoring, particularly where we have younger people mentoring someone like me. And one of the challenges there is that person's knowledge and understanding of how to be a mentor. And that I don't mean that to sound patronizing, like I know how and they don't know how. However, there is a whether it's a skill, a technique, whatever we call it, and it'd be interesting to explore how far we could support younger or inexperienced people in that reverse mentoring role, if you like.
Yes. Yeah. And John, I feel very old right now.
No, not compared to me, I can assure you.
So, as somebody on LinkedIn who is watching us has said that mentoring is about tapping on somebody else's resources.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to look at it. And yes, you do need to be. It doesn't mean that because you have loads of experience, you can just transfer. You do need to, know how to pass that on. Because unfortunately, and we've seen this with all generations, the older generation always thinks they are better than the younger ones. I mean, that's a fact.
Yep.
The reality is they're not better or worse. They're just very, very different.
Yes.
Which poses huge challenges in the workplace. But yeah, to answer to your question, to become a mentor, you do need to know how to actually mentor. Exactly as in order to become a coach, you do need to know how to coach. Yeah.
Very interesting. Yeah. So it does mean that those of us, for example, who want to be reverse mentored, actually, one of our responsibilities is to not to take control, but to try and help inculcate some of those mentoring skills in the person from whom we are learning. I think it starts to get a bit esoteric there. It's quite interesting. Just talking a little bit further about coaching, a great quote from a point from Danny Wareham on the chat feed, to saying that Alex Ferguson didn't need to be scoring 30 goals a season in order to manage Manchester United. So this is your point about I don't need to be an expert in the function itself in order to be able to coach other people. It's the expertise in coaching. Do you think, because we often say that, I think Drucker actually said one of the roles of a leader is to create more leaders. Do you think that one of the roles of a coach is not only to help the behavioral change to improve somebody's ability to deliver? Do you think one of the roles of a coach is also to help that person to become a coach themselves?
How shall I answer that? If you are within an organization as a manager or a leader, you are a coach as well. So in that context, yes, that should be part of your responsibility. While if you're an external coach, and that's why I wasn't sure where to answer that from. If you're an external coach, you usually work with an organization or with a specific clients on specific coaching goals, which could be leadership related. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Interesting, yeah, and a great comment from Umer Farouk on the chat feed, who says, I found mentoring to be an opportunity to selflessly give back to society. And this is what you were saying about the Institute's mentoring platform, the opportunity for fellows and members to mentor, to give back to the rest of the community. I was going to say, does it need to be entirely selfless? Because the point that you made about we all benefit from being mentors as well as being mentored.
Yes. First of all, I don't believe that there is a completely selfless deed, in the sense whenever you do something, you always get something back. And I would say no, because I'm actually looking through this personally, through these relationships. I'm looking to learn. My objective is not to become a dinosaur. So speaking from a personal objective, because I know I'm getting older, which is natural. So one of my biggest drivers is to keep learning. So one of the ways to do that is through reverse mentoring, or making sure that I actually benefit and get information from any generation. So the minute I think the biggest mistake sometimes we make as humans is we think that, oh, now I'm 50 or 60, or I can't learn new things. Well, if that's what you believe, well, then yes, you can't. So
Interesting, because I've sometimes when I'm talking to people about leadership, and I say, well, the way I would define leadership, we have to recognize leadership is not a state of grace. There's not a point that we come to where we mop our fevered brow and say, wow, now I'm a leader. Because that, and actually that learning about leadership has to go on forever. And in a way, your point about learning from every generation becomes very important here, actually, because it's not just that I want to find somebody who's Gen Z who can help me to learn how to use technology or social media well, or whatever it is. Actually, there are learning experiences to be taken from everybody, including my peers, of course.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, because experience comes from everywhere. Interesting. If we are just thinking about team leadership, which is another one of the themes that's emerging in the events during the course of this week, if we apply some of the things that we've just talked about, the need for well-being, the coaching and mentoring to team leadership, there's a great quote from John McCreary, who was a defense analyst, and he said, every complex system will fail. The best measure of health is the speed of recovery. And I think of a team as actually a complex system. So if we assume that every complex system will fail, sometimes teams will fail. How do we work with them from a well-being and coaching and mentoring perspective to get them to recognize that?
Yeah, we could have just a webinar on this topic, to be honest with you. So I'm trying to manage my own bias, because, as you know, one of my passions is actually teams.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yeah. So speed of recovery, yes. I would add two more dimensions here, and the one would be intensity. So so it's not about not failing, but it's how intense the failure is, and then frequency, how frequent the failure happens. So in theory, when you have a resilient team, these three criteria need to be better. Which we borrow that concept from mental health. So it's not about not becoming stressed, but it's about how you manage these three dimensions. So that's one aspect. Then the other aspect is about systems, yeah, teams are systems and very, very complex, and they continuously evolve. So, and there is sometimes, when we say that a system has failed, another author, Ronald Heifetz is his name, if I remember correctly, he has spoken about the illusion of a broken system. So in a sense, sometimes systems are the way they are because they're serving a purpose. However, as outsiders, we think they're broken, we think they're failed because that's, we're outside of this, we're not in it. But how many times, maybe you or our audience, how many times have you found yourself being part of an organization, of a team, and where things are wrong, yet, however, nobody wants to change those things. Nobody wants to rock the boat. So theoretically, the system is broken, but nobody wants to touch it. So, but the reason for that is because it's actually serving something. Am I making sense at all?
Perfect sense, absolutely. And I can think of at least 2 organizations that I've worked in the past where I have gone into the organization and thought, this is completely broken. It appears to be dysfunctional, even though somehow it's producing an output. And yet the resistance to change in the organization was enormous because, as you quite rightly said, it served the interests of certain people, and actually most of the people within the organization, to have it run in that way. And it's interesting because it sort of indicates to me the difference between a system, say a mechanical system or a mechanical process, and a system with human beings in it. Because the mechanical system might be made up of objects which operate together in a certain way. People, of course, are not objects, and they have opinions and they make decisions about what suits them. So which adds to the complexity of a system with people in it, I think, probably.
Exactly. And you used the word resistance, which I always find interesting because at the workplace, when people hear the word resistance, it's like, we don't want resistance. But resistance is data. Somebody or some people are trying to give you a message. They just, excuse my voice, they just don't know how to give you that message. So they just resist.
Right.
Which might be a bit of a passive-aggressive behavior, but it's still data. So as a leader, you need to understand, okay, what is the system now trying to tell me? What does it mean? And who are they what are they resisting to? Is it my message? In other words, maybe I haven't been clear. Is it me? Is it what I represent? Is it because of the assumptions they have made? Resistance has so many levers, but it's data. So once we pass the point that resistance is not just, I don't want to do this, but it's about data, things are a bit different, sorry.
Very interesting. And I love that concept of resistance being data, because that immediately makes it objective rather than subjective. So we stop saying these people are resistant, this person is resistant. Yeah, we instead we say, I feel resistance here. What is this resistance telling me?
Yes,
and
exactly.
that, from a leadership perspective, sometimes I think it's actually very important in a sense, to think in objective terms rather than subjective terms. We spend a lot of time hearing from all sorts of people about it's important to be human and to be authentic as a leader, to be compassionate, which is about engaging with individuals. Actually, sometimes I guess we have to step away from that, looking at this person as a human, and look at their behavior from an objective standpoint. Does that work, do you think?
Yeah, that's very spot on, John, because that allows you to have that distance as well, to zoom out from the situation. And I think in another webinar, you and I had the conversation about this ability to be on the dance floor as a leader, but also on the balcony. So two completely different viewpoints. Both are necessary. Unfortunately, as humans, we tend to have a preference towards one or the other, but both are necessary. So it's using that objective, as you said, it allows me to get out and see what's going on here. It's not personal. So what's happening? Yeah.
Interesting. And just particularly thinking about teams, because teams are not only in a state of flux, they are dynamic, they are changing all the time. Sometimes they are changing because they have members coming in or going out of the team, because of course all teams are not stable in membership terms. And there's one of the greatest challenges I found with teams is onboarding new people to a team, especially one which has been functioning effectively, and in a sense helping them either what's the word? I have to be careful how I say this because we can't be absolute. Either adjust their behavior to the team, which may or may not be appropriate, or actually shift the team's behavior because they are different. And how do we manage that as a leadership, as a team leader?
Onboarding of new members even if you have just one person entering the team, the whole dynamic will change. However, again, from systems theory, we do know that unfortunately, and I know this sounds as a very, very strong statement, the system is always stronger than the individual.
Right.
So, and this is why if you want to change something, you can't just change it on your own. You do need to have allies and to have, if not the whole system, a big part of the system with you. So on board very soon, if you are different as an individual, the system basically will swallow you, if I dare say. So now we know from organizations there are teams, there are cultures that have more closed organizational cultures. So for those cultures, it's more difficult to accept new members. So usually new members in those cultures have it much more difficult. There are organizational cultures where cultures are much more open. So onboarding happens in much more smooth way, in a smoother way. So it really depends. But absolutely, as a leadership, as a team, we do have the responsibility to accept new team members, but it all depends a lot in the existing culture. And as well in the to what extent there is psychological safety in the existing team. The higher the psychological safety, the easier it will be for new team members to join in and feel included.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, that because it brings up this. I remember years ago thinking one of the things that I perceived to be almost instrumental in whether or not people worked with a team well or fitted into a team was the sense of humor. There was a sort of norm of the sense of humor, and if they had a different sense of humor, then there was going to be some friction and stuff like this. Is that rational? Because I have no research basis to use for that.
Yes, absolutely. Humor and fun is actually a characteristic of teams and organizations with high psychological safety. Absolutely, because it means I can be more authentic. It means I can joke with you. It means I can be vulnerable. It's okay if I am a bit, silly, and I'm accepted. So I bring my whole self, if you like, in the team or in the organization. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. And the other thing that I remember is I read somewhere, and I like to quote quotes and where they're from, but I can't remember where this is from. Somebody's saying that in order to influence a change within a group or a team, you needed to essentially have about 1/3 of the people in that group signed up to what you wanted to achieve. And until you get to about 1/3, you won't. It's like a critical inflection point in the psychology of a team. Is there any rationale in thinking like that? Do you think? I mean, is there a 33% of the team or 40% of the team?
I don't have any draw on, but why it makes sense to me is because what we were saying earlier, you do need allies. you can't just bring change on your own. So the more, I don't know whether it's 33% or 40, but the more people you have with you, the more successful, the more are the odds that you will succeed in making a change. So I think it definitely makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, and a couple of comments in the feed, actually, just one which talks about what happens to the breaths of fresh air that get ground down by corporate cultures. And I guess, and I suspect most of us actually have been in this situation where we come to an organization, a team, whatever, and we think, oh, I've got some great ideas here. And actually over time, the edges get knocked off and we discover, as you said earlier on, the system is actually far bigger than the individual. And if the system doesn't give, then actually the individual will have to. Very interesting.
And sometimes organizations do that unintentionally. Very recently, to what you just said, I have an example. An organization is running a psychological safety survey. So we're talking with them, okay, this is the number of people and so on, and we have 10 people who just joined, so they shouldn't be part of the survey. And we immediately said, why? They said, well, they're very, very new. They want to know what's going on and so on and so forth. And we said, actually, no, they already have a first impression. So and that's the first thing. They have a first impression, which is very crucial. So they're not yet part of the system. So you do want that breath of fresh air. The third thing is that if you do not include them in the survey, you're actually giving them the message that you haven't arrived yet and you're already being shut down and So, and oh yes, my God. And all this was completely unintentional. And this is an example of how organizations, out of pure good intention, make mistakes sometimes by these little things.
And actually, you're absolutely right. And of course, that's a sort of organizational unconscious bias. And a very interesting comment actually from Carolyn Uphill on the feed, talking about the fact that humor and fun can be very difficult for neurodivergent people to comprehend. And that actually, when I talk about sense of humor being something that determines a team ethos, a team psychology, then I am actually displaying some unconscious bias there without realizing actually it is possible to separate deliberately or not willfully, but accidentally, people who are neurodivergent, or in your example, people who are newly arrived at the organization. And that unconscious separation can be quite devastating, actually. I think for
very
people
much so.
in a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And creating an inclusive environment for neurodivergence is of utmost importance. And again, another example how we might make mistakes unintentionally.
Absolutely. And interestingly, thinking about the people who are not of what shall I say, traditional. Let's think about young leaders, because most of the young people I've met certainly wouldn't fit into the label traditional. And thank God for it, actually. I'm very pleased about the fact that they are not just traditional. We have a tendency, or we've had a tendency, I think, to speak often about young leaders as future leaders. Yeah. And that's quite interesting, actually, because I'm of the view that actually they mostly are leaders now. And maybe not have a position that says I'm a leader, but nevertheless, they are in many cases capable of leadership, and certainly with as much mentoring as the rest of us are likely to get. Do you think that's fair to say young leaders now, rather than future leaders?
First of all, thank you for making me feel old twice in one You're absolutely right. I remember, I think it was in 1999, and back in my corporate days, and we used to have a strategy for Leadership 2020, which used to sound very, I don't know, almost like a science fiction back in 1999. But anyway, I think in one of your interviews, if you don't mind me sharing, you spoke about leadership everywhere.
Yes.
So first we have that leadership is everywhere.
Yes.
I completely agree with you. These are not leaders in the future. They're now.
Yep.
So it's about now. So you are absolutely right, and that's spot on.
Yeah, and if I think about, the Institute has 5 dimensions of leadership: authenticity, vision, ownership, collaboration, and achievement. And there's absolutely no reason why somebody who is 16 or 14 should not be displaying those qualities. They don't have to be 40 or 60, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and I guess one of the things, we come back to this idea of reverse mentoring, for example, recognizing those leadership qualities, not only exploiting them or utilizing them for reverse mentoring of ourselves, but actually identifying opportunities for those skills to be displayed more and more often. And for the benefit of both society and our organizations. How do we support young people who have leadership capability to develop it further and find their niche in delivering that, do you think?
Which is an interesting question, because I think there is, the question might have a tiny weeny unconscious bias as well, because we could ask them.
Yes. Yeah.
We could ask them, what's your preferred way to be supported? Because again, we think that we know the answer to that. And sometimes asking those questions, how would you like to be supported? We might be really surprised. And I think, joking aside, coaching and mentoring and the things, like also the Institute is doing, those are definitely part of an inclusive environment. And I think because it's about their inclusion and development, they need to be part of that. So we do need to have that conversation with them. And it's not just us deciding how they would like, but also listen to them. What would they need?
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And yes, I'm displaying my unconscious biases at will today. and it's interesting because I've talked with people quite often in recent years, in particular, actually, about things like shadow boards. Having a board of younger people who can feed into an organization the implications of that organization's strategy for their generation. Because of course, if their generation is not part of developing the strategy, then actually there may well be a mismatch. Is there is there a non-threatening way in which leadership figures, I don't mean individuals, but organizations, can actually ask that question of other generations? What is it actually that we could do that would help you become more effective, or indeed more accomplished and more experienced in leadership? Can we do that in a way that's not threatening to the more traditional mindsets, do you think?
Yeah, and the word, as you are articulating that question, the word acceptance comes to my mind. So because why would you feel threatened? Why would I feel threatened? So if there's I guess a growth mind and an open mind, it's, why would you feel threatened if we're here to support each other, to learn from each other? So I think if somebody feels threatened, there are other things which is, again, goes back to the previous conversation. There's something else going on if you are resisting that process. So what's going on? And again, it's about showing interest and curiosity when those negative emotions arise: threat, fear, what's going on, rather than saying, we're very fast at labeling people. Oh, he feels threatened. She feels this. Let's find out what's going on for you. I think once we get over this labeling, it really changes the whole dynamic.
Excellent. Yeah. And I have to say, I do think that curiosity should be listed amongst the primary leadership skills, really, because learning is based on our curiosity and stuff. And I very much like that point you made about having a growth mindset, because that allows us not to be fearful about what is new and what is different, but actually to chase after it. Interesting. Maria, there is a huge amount, obviously, first of all, in our conversation, for which thank you very much indeed. There's also, because what we've talked about is some of the themes that are emerging in International Leadership Week.
Yes.
There's an enormous amount of interesting material coming during the course of this week, I think. Is there, from your particular perspective and from your particular background, is there anything that you would be looking for during the course of this week, or that you would suggest that our audience looks for or looks to find out more about?
I've looked at the various webinars and conferences, and there is so much. So what I would say and what I will be doing is I'm strongly suggesting to people to actually engage in those conversations. I can't just pick a topic because of they're so rich, actually. And I know that most of the conversations will be recorded as well. So if you don't, whoever is watching, if they don't have time to watch live, they should try through the Institute to try and watch them. I think it's a major conference that should not be missed. And thank you guys for providing this opportunity.
That's lovely, Maria. Thank you very much indeed. And that brings us pretty much to a natural end, I think, for this opening session of International Leadership Week. Thank you all for being with us today at the opening of ILW 23. My very special thanks to our guest, Dr. Maria Katsarumäki, and to all of you for joining us. I think we have a great week ahead. Please do look at our website to see some of the events in prospect. Join the conversation via social media using the hashtag ILW23, and enjoy International Leadership Week. Thank you very much indeed, everybody, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.